the world has changed. So just constantly applying to jobs online is not going to get you the next role.
If you don't go into it with an actual plan and you know what you want to accomplish, then your likelihood of actually achieving it is a lot lower. Welcome to another episode of This Is the Way with Artin and Michael. Today's episode, we're going to talk about the mistakes people make when they're applying for new jobs and how to quicken your process into landing a job. And if you don't listen to this advice, then we won't be surprised if you come back later and say, I don't know why it's taking so long. All right, let's get going. Artin?
Yeah, I don't think most people realize that it's a mistake, or maybe they're just not doing the right things and taking the right steps. And they feel like, oh, it's, I used 20 years ago, I was just applying online or applying, sending a resume in somewhere. Well, the world has changed. So just constantly applying to jobs online is not going to get you the next role. So yes, you have to start off with updating that resume. And there's a lot of tools now that you can use, AI, automation, even services. So definitely start there. And then after that, there's a lot of things you can do. But I would say that's phase one. Phase one is updating your resume. And then after that, you have to be clear on what kind of roles are you actually looking for. What are your interests? So write down at least 5 types of roles that you are interested in. You could do this by just looking at the different job boards, LinkedIn, wherever you're looking at. Start writing down, here are the 5 things and the 5 types of roles that I'm interested in. And then start aligning your resume to that. And then what were your target companies? At least 20, maybe at the very least 10. But you should have resume, the type of roles that you want, and then who your target company. And that's the table stakes. Like that's phase one, and that's what you should start off with.
I think that's great. And I want to drill into a couple of these here for a minute. I think, initially when you mentioned about resume, and again, we could provide them, but honestly, if anybody just search for how to use ChatGPT to make a better resume, like these days, it's amazing. You have your own coach, right there. And again, don't just take exactly what it gives you, but look for options. And just as one example is if you go into, in fact, I was helping somebody on this the other day. You go in and you basically take your initial resume and you ask it, you give it the prompt to basically say, hey, I need some more, value driven. I'm trying to think the exact prompt to give it right now. But again, look it up, you'll find it. But that basically is saying that illustrates the impact that I drove. Please make sure each bullet is illustrative of the impact that I drove while I was in a role. And you can ask ChatGPT to embellish on it a little bit to help you make it stronger. And I'm not saying you keep those lies in there, but I'm saying that sometimes we limit our own success because we undermine it. We don't highlight it for the importance it was. So ChatGPT can come at you a little more loose, and it can be amazing at times when you look at that. You're like, actually, that is what I did. Thanks, ChatGPT, for giving me that compliment. Capture that in there. Do it for each one of those bullet points, and don't be afraid to say, hey, ChatGPT, give me 5 more options or 10 more options. And then as you have a bunch of those, now you could go in the end and you could keep the strongest ones there. But once you have that baseline resume and you now know the different roles that you want, well, now it's going to allow you to be able to be a lot more focused on, the types of individuals. But while we said you have one resume, you were optimizing your resume for a target role there. You weren't necessarily optimizing your resume for every single role that Artin mentioned that you might also identify. And that's something we'll talk about here in a moment. So phase one, really clarity on your role, making sure you know the target, companies. And again, also, you could use ChatGPT and you can let it know, hey, what are companies similar to Disney? What are companies similar to Procter & Gamble? Like, ask it for that help. Don't be afraid if you're stuck. Otherwise, just search the internet. Don't look for a super easy answer on what companies you should work for. It's going to take a little bit of time to find those, but it's super important because the next phase is really going to be about how you start to hone in a little bit more with those particular contacts.
Yeah. And I would add that this first phase is heavy on research because you have to research your roles, the companies. Just think of ChatGPT as your assistant that you hand off and delegate these research tasks to. And then when all the data comes back to you, you are the one that actually is putting it together and fine tuning it the way you think is best. It's not ChatGPT is not supposed to be the ends all place to go and trust whatever it does. It's just think of it as a research assistant, and it's a very, very good research assistant, actually.
Absolutely. So then just to highlight some mistakes that people make in this area here, because this is really your planning stage. And too many people skip this. They want to jump straight into, well, let me just start searching boards and finding what jobs. Well, that one sounds interesting. Let me try that. And look, that could be part of your discovery process, and it might be part of your planning process, but a lot of people are just using it as literally that is their process. And then they just send a resume to that. And that resume may be a generic resume for every single role. And it's important that you modify the resume or your cover letter differently for all of these. But the other reason why this is so critical here is that like anything, if you don't go into it with an actual plan and you know what you want to accomplish, then your likelihood of actually achieving it is a lot lower. And it's why I think a lot of people, when you hear them, you rarely hear people say, I want to go get a job at company X, Y, Z, or I want to be doing this, and I will find a way that I'm going to be doing that in the next year. And I think that's where, or in the next 3 months, 6 months, whatever it might be. And I think people need to walk into it with a little bit more of that focus, because absent of that, they're going to end up wherever they're fortunate enough that maybe their resume and a job were a match. And it's not about that. It's about you trying to find what you want and crafting a plan to be able to get there. So let's move into phase 2 then. In phase 2, while there's still some more, research here, this is now about actually how you take that research that you've done and you start to actually, put it into place, but more heavily around rapport building. So Art, do you want to dive into phase 2?
Yeah, sure. I'll kick it off. What's important is building that relationship and getting people to know you and see you kind of as a personal brand. And that's where, if you know the 5, 10, 20 companies you're targeting, LinkedIn is an amazing place to start looking at, well, who are the people that actually work at these companies, and start reaching out to them and start, connecting. But you have to do it in a way that's authentic, but from an adding value perspective. You're not going to reach out on your first attempt and say, oh, I'm looking for a job, can you help me? No, that's not how you build rapport. You build rapport by, if that person is actually active on LinkedIn, you compliment their post, you reply to their post, maybe share something that they will find valuable. You have to start that way. And then when the time is right, then you can say, hey, by the way, I just noticed that your company is hiring for such and such a role. Can you connect me to the hiring manager, or would you mind referring me to the hiring manager?
Or do you have any advice for somebody like me who's interested in
advice? Yeah. Once you've built that rapport, and it's online. It's not. We're not saying that you have to now go out and meet everybody in person, but that goes a long way. Just that your name and your brand being familiar to somebody will go a long way for them to wanting to take their time and stick their neck out for you.
Yeah. On that note too, I think people who are like, that still feels uncomfortable to them. It's like, look, what you don't have anything to lose by working to build these, relationships. And somebody might be like, well, what if I ruin them? Or what if I can't build those relationships? Well, then you already didn't have it. So you've got nothing to lose and only something to gain. And the goal should be to get better at that, because it is so critical. Because look, your experience on this might be a little different than mine, Artin, but I would say the majority of the roles that I ever filled were usually through people that I had already had some sort of relationship with, or who the people on my team had a relationship with. And that's how most roles get filled, which is why we're stressing the importance of this as something people need to do. And LinkedIn makes it so much easier to do today. But if people aren't taking the step and doing the step, then you just have to know that ultimately the numbers are going to work against you. It's going to take longer because you're behind everybody else who has some sort of a direct connection, even if the direct connection is loose.
Yeah. And let's create two buckets. One bucket is fairly entry level or fairly new in a career. That bucket, exactly what we talked about, you should be doing, because you probably haven't had time to build that network organically or do that work. Because the folks that are the best at this, they're not waiting when they need to look for a job to start networking and building the rapport. They're doing it on a regular basis. So that's one bucket. The other bucket is you're hiring, management and leadership positions. And you are absolutely right. Anytime I was hiring in management leadership positions, my go-to was, hey, this other leader or this other leader, do you have any recommendations, any referrals that you can send me for this role? It's rare to hire a leadership position without a referral. That it was just, oh, let me look at this resume. Oh, this looks good. Let's bring him in an interview and then hire. I never did that. There was always a referral by another leader that was so strong and compelling that basically made up my mind on who to hire for that leadership role.
I think even with what you were saying on that more entry, and people define entry, slightly, different. The person could still come into entry and still have a level of experience. But I remember individual once who, in fact, actually, when we think about, we had a role literally at Disney that was called an entry-level digital operator that people came into. And it was entry-level for that particular role, but it could be that people came from different experience. But I remember an individual there who was hired into the role because he had really good customer service. He had met somebody else who was the head of client services there at I think it was T-Mobile or Verizon or AT&T. I think it was anyway, one of those stores. And this person just left an impression there. And through that connection, that actually is still what got him in and out. So I still think the idea here is people feel more comfortable if they have this sense of already having some relationship with you. And the minute you walk in that door and somebody can already feel like, oh, it's you. There's just, even if that is you, is you're the person who has been commenting or thumbs upping, my things on LinkedIn. And there's a lot better ways we could do with that. And again, as I just use the example here, it could be through your place of work that you meet somebody. I mean, look, me, you and I both ended up ultimately in at Disney because I sold women's shoes to somebody at Macy's. And when she paid with her credit union card, and I said, well, what do you do? And she shared with me, that she worked at Disney and what she did. And I'm like, I at that point, I was honest. There was no LinkedIn then. And I said, wow, that's amazing. I actually recently graduated from film school, and I have, these internships at these companies, but I haven't been able to get in just yet. And I think I was in denial about it's who you know. And anyway, sure enough, that led to me getting in as a temp role, eventually led to you coming in there as a temp role as well. So, and even then, like, there was this other position later when I moved over to DreamWorks. And when I moved over to DreamWorks, there was somebody somebody recommended they said they were applying for it and they told me about it. So I decided to as well. And as it turns out, that person said something good to me about, to some of the other hiring managers. And that helped me get a foot in the door. And once more, that happened. Keep picking. And you could say the same thing when I look at other roles that I either interviewed for or where I was hired into, where it was the same thing. It was once more, somebody's like, oh, I heard about you from so-and-so, or, oh yeah, so-and-so mentioned this. Like, that's almost always the way it is. So anybody, if this is not clear now, who is not taking this route and just applying for it, you are playing, let's just say you're playing a numbers game. And you know what? You will eventually land a job. It may or may not be the job you're excited about, but do you want to have to apply to a job? Because literally somebody the other day is like, oh, I've applied for 300 jobs now and nothing. And I'm like, well, if you're just emptying applying, then what do you expect? Eventually, maybe the number's 500, maybe they'll hit one. But I even think,
it's like playing roulette.
Yeah,
that is roulette. It's hard to guess the right number when you're gambling on a roulette.
Right. But if somebody wants to increase their chances, then really the key is, and this is why the first phase was planning, and this phase here is really about honing in now on getting to know these individuals and really trying to make sure that you're fostering and building these relationships. And another key part of this right now as well, and by the way, for people who are like, oh, but I'm not good at that, once more, and don't completely outsource it to ChatGPT, but you can ask ChatGPT, hey, help me, come across as more genuine in my response is what I'm saying, but I feel robotic. See what ChatGPT provides for you and leverage it. Sometimes it's going to be better. Sometimes it'll just reinforce that you feel good about, no, I'm actually not as robotic as I thought. But you're trying to build rapport during this stage so that you can subtly come in with an ask later. Don't just go all in right away and be like, hey, want to go back to your room? Which is sort of what it's like doing when you just jump straight into asking for something before you've tried to find ways to add value. And that's the piece I want to say with rapport building too. That's key. When people can look on LinkedIn, just because we're putting a lot of focus there, you can add value in that case just by giving people the thumbs up or telling them that you found what they did was insightful. Send them a personal message on that as well as putting it out onto their actual feed. And then from there, you can then take that actual step to see if there are other things. Maybe you'll see that they post that, oh yeah, I'm trying to find somebody who knows how to do X, Y, Z, or we're hiring somebody who does this. That's where you might be able to be like, oh, I know somebody, and start connecting them and adding value in other ways. But you could start by just giving them significance because that gives somebody value as well.
Yeah. And the saying, it's who you know, not what you know. It's very true. And, there's a psychological term for it. It's called, proximity bias. And whether you like it or not, it's real. People tend to play favoritism to people that they know. So you can't fight that. You just got to accept that that is human behavior and play that game.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think so. A couple of other things in this phase that you want to do too is at this point, you've likely found some other roles that you were interested in, and your resume that you initially created may not be a perfect fit for it. So you will need to create different resumes if those roles you're applying for are substantially different. And I highly recommend that. And once more, you could use ChatGPT by asking ChatGPT. You basically feed it your existing baseline resume, and then you tell it, here's another resume of a like role that I'm interested in. Please rework my resume with some of these qualifications in mind for this particular job description. So just make sure I was clear on that. You basically feed it a job description, feed it your resume, and say, please help make updates so that my resume is more aligned with what they're looking for in this role. And another thing you can do at that state too is you could actually say to ChatGPT, please also highlight for me what you see as some skill gaps between their job description and my resume. And that allows you to actually pull those out and start to say, okay, can I reinforce the resume with these? And if that's too much of a stretch, what step can I take now to be able to show and answer that question when it comes up, when somebody says, what's your experience here? For you to be able to be like, well, look, while I admit that that's an area where I'm not as strong, I've actually recently enrolled in a course around that. And I'm actually proud to say that I've now achieved X, Y, Z. Like you can go in ready to address that. So I think those are the core things that you want to do within this phase. One of the things that we'll get into in phase 3, but I want to highlight here is some people might be like, well, what about updating your LinkedIn profile? Look, you could theoretically do that when you do your resume earlier, but the reason why I start thinking about it in phase 3 instead is because the critical thing is that you need to get out and start developing that rapport in those relationships. You could actually almost start that before you even have your resume ready. It's just you want at least a baseline resume in case all of a sudden you start building this rapport and somebody, is faster than you are to be like, oh, we're hiring, you want to at least make sure you're ready for that. And it still is normal for people to take, the resume in, but we just don't want you to procrastinate and wait to get everything lined up, your resumes, your cover letters, your LinkedIn, before you actually make any moves. So in phase 3, which we'll dive into here in a moment, we'll touch a little bit more on your LinkedIn profile. But Artin, anything else in phase 2?
No, I think we covered it. Let's hop on to phase 3. If you're going to use LinkedIn to network, then you should update your profile. If somebody just messages me out of the blue on LinkedIn, and I read the message, the first thing I do is I click on their profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh, they have a LinkedIn profile. And I see, oh I want to see, who is this person? Why are they contacting me? So I think it depends on your situation. If you're very new to the professional world and you're starting off your career, yeah, it might be a little less important. So it depends. But I lean more towards get that LinkedIn profile updated at the same time as a resume, because people might click into your profile.
One thing, again, just to say how easy things like ChatGPT makes it, you can have your synopsis in there. If it's not already something you lift from your job description, there are prompts out there where you could basically say to ChatGPT, hey, please help provide me key synopsis for, be it your headline, be it some of your actual bullets in there. So you bring up a good point. And look, it is only about an hour there. My thing is, though, is nobody needs to wait to start making sure that they're reaching out to individuals. In fact, most people, like top performers, the way that it works for top performers when it comes to finding a job, and I'm not saying it, sometimes a top performer can't struggle, but usually it's a lot more straightforward. And actually, your example for this is a really good one. Artin, when you decided that you were going to change jobs, well, you already had, in essence, 6 potential suitors lined up because you were always networking. And what I mean by that is I don't mean you were necessarily, up until recently, you weren't active on LinkedIn the way you were, but you were networking in life through events, through lunches, through dinners, through meetings. And if people are regularly doing that, then this becomes a lot easier when they get there. And I think that's why it can sometimes be easier for, I say higher level where that's a natural part of their job, but people where it's not as natural part of their job, you got to work harder on that earlier in your career.
The one thing I want to say, and this is just purely from my personal experience, networking to me is not like, let me just connect with somebody. Networking is reputation building, because when you're networking with someone, why the hell are you networking with them? So once I made the connection, I made it a point to make sure that my reputation was as high as it could be with that person. And that came from following through, doing whatever I said I was going to do, adding value. So those things just caused my reputation to be at a high level. So when I did decide, hey, I think I want to make a change here, there were jobs, multi-6-figure jobs coming my way. And some of these jobs weren't even available jobs. They just on the fly created those roles because they knew the type of value I can bring in. And that's the power of networking and building that personal brand and having a high reputation, that things will just happen to you and you might be able to skip all these phases.
100%. Yeah, it's so important. And again, unfortunately, a lot of people don't think about this until it's too late. I mean, heck, I even know some people who they knew that they were going to be impacted and they knew the date, but they still didn't start any of this, even though they had 3 to 6 months, whatever it might be in advance to do so. And it's like, just you don't want to, you want to constantly be looking to, again, say network. You and I we'll do another follow-up on networking because, it's not always easy for everyone. It's not been something easy for me. I've found myself enjoying it more and more through some different tactics I put in place that we could talk about in the future. But I want to just run through a couple of quick things here, really, as we phase 3 really becomes a little bit more about, taking these, where you've been building a report to that next level and going forth with a little bit more of the ask. But also, when you do go for the ask and somebody says something to you along the lines of, oh, no, you know what, we don't have this time, then to then be okay being like, all right, well, now I'm going to look for that loose introduction and just basically say, hey, do you know anybody who is looking for somebody for that type of a role? And don't be shy. Now you've basically expanded the people who are out there thinking about it on your behalf. And if you were genuine and you gave them significance and you kick in the idea that these people also want to try to do you a solid favor. But when you do start getting these meetings, what's key is that you don't ever ghost anyone, especially even if they ghost you. Don't people are horrible with that when it comes to getting back to people who are applying for roles and things like that. But just be you, be consistent, because you never know what it's going to turn to later. And it could be that somebody was just really busy. But when you do get in for these interviews, You need to make sure, obviously we're not going to start giving lessons on, dress the part and that kind of stuff, but it's like, want to make sure that through that interview, if you don't feel you're prepared to answer those questions, do some preliminary run-throughs with friends. Use ChatGPT. You could tell ChatGPT, give it the job description and tell it, please come up with a list of questions that might be asked in this interview. It will give you 100 questions if that's what you ask it for. And you could run through each one of those and prepare it. And guess what? It'll even do the work for you. You could say, and please give me the best answers for each of them. Like, it's incredible what's in our fingertips for people to be able to show up prepared. And then after people are done with that interview, please follow up with a thank you, email or thank you card, whatever it is. It goes a long way. That was usually for me something that helps separate, key individuals, and the sensibility I was also often looking for. But it shows that they took the next step. And just because you don't get a role doesn't mean that it's a dead end role. I've gone back before. I've known people who've gone back to an individual that they may not have hired the first time. You never know what's going to happen with the other candidates. You just still want to show up as the best person that you are. Not like what I faced the other day with somebody who they're like, oh, I have this thing you might be interested in. They tried to sell me on it. And then I said, well, you know what? Check back again in maybe about a month time. Now is not good. And what do? They automatically ghosted me, didn't even respond back. And that doesn't exactly leave you with a warm feeling that makes you want to reconnect with that person in the future. So, Artin, what else would you add to that? Because I know we're coming to the end of this episode.
Yeah, I mean, just as a closing remarks, take the time just to follow these steps and make it your own. You might want to switch things up, which is totally fine, but just take the time to do this, to do the work. It'll pay off. And then if you're not looking for a job now, do the networking, do the connecting with folks. At some point in your career, you're going to need them. So start adding value now. So when you do need them, it doesn't come across as a one-way street, that person actually going to be willing to help you because they've received so much value from you.
Absolutely. I think that's the core. We just wanted to rush through here and make sure people had the high level. But if anybody has any follow-up questions or things they want us to dive into, let us know below. Otherwise, please also subscribe and make sure you come back, listen to us each Thursday when our new episode drops.